Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 18th chapter. Please stand with me. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. In our gospel reading today, Jesus tells a parable. And his audience consisted of some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else. The story was about a Pharisee and a tax collector. And the Pharisee then stood up and said, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or this tax collector. The Pharisee, in fact, was someone who was confident of his own righteousness and looked down on everybody else. And that is what he said. We know people like that. They are difficult to be around. But how did the tax collector see himself? The tax collector beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Now, which of these two attitudes does Jesus prefer? Well, Jesus then said, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus wants us to be in relationship. And that's pretty hard when you're looking down on everybody else. So I've spent some time in prison, visiting people, not as an inmate, and prisons are scary places. They're all criminals, you know. If I was ever incarcerated, I think I'd ask for a private room. But actually in a prison, the worst thing you can do to an inmate is put them where? Solitary confinement. Just lock them up, all alone with no human interaction. It's torture. By the way, when a small child is acting out, the parent looks at them sternly and says, if you don't start behaving, I'm going to give you a... Yes, some of you have apparently experienced this timeout. What's a timeout? It is solitary confinement for third graders. Now, if punishment is your goal, it works. Because there's nothing worse than being alone. The ancient Greeks actually had a word for someone who chose to be solitary, who chose to be isolated. And the word was idios, suggesting that someone who refused to participate in community life, who tried to make it only on their own, who didn't contribute to the common good, was in fact an idiot. Why don't we take down my picture while we're talking about idiots here? But who this idios is describing is that arrogant, aloof Pharisee from our gospel reading, who is all alone, and he's looking down at everybody else. But I wonder how that worked out for him. Because when researchers look at what distinguishes happy people from unhappy people, they find that there's actually one factor, one difference that consistently separates the two groups. It's not income, health, security, attractiveness, IQ. It's not career success. What distinguishes consistently happier people from less happy people is the presence of rich, deep, joy-producing, meaningful relationships with other human beings. This is how strong the correlation is. People who have bad health habits, like cigarette smoking, lousy diets, lack of exercise, but that are connected to others, live longer than people who have great health habits, but are isolated from other human beings. It is healthier to eat Halloween candy and fast food with your friends than to eat broccoli alone. Well, that's worth some applause. Yeah, you're right. Spending meaningful time with friends, family, people who care about us, it's absolutely indispensable to our well-being. That's the power of relationships. Of course, that's not news to God, because it's God who made us that way, right? Do you remember God created Adam, and then God said, "It is not good for man to be" what? Alone. You are made to be in relationship with others. Now, God created two places for these relationships to take place. The first is family. Family was God's idea. And the family is where we first learn about how relationships work. When kids are loved and encouraged in families, when third graders are handed Bibles from their parents, they generally thrive. But when they're ignored or resented, they can struggle mightily. You've perhaps heard this story about orphanages in the early 20th century. In orphanages where babies were held regularly, where they were played with, those babies did pretty well. But in orphanages where babies were fed and changed, but that was it. They were otherwise left alone. Over 90% of those babies died. God did not make us to be alone. Now, I'm not saying families are always easy. George Burns once said, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family that lives in another city. My brother lives in Duluth. It's about right. Families can be difficult at times, but even people in totally dysfunctional families keep hoping that mom will quit drinking, that dad will come home. We crave these close relationships that family provides because God made us for relationships. And then one day God said, no, I'm going to start a new family. Only this will be a family of people who come from varied and different backgrounds. They will have no genetic similarities, but they will be called brothers and sisters in Christ. And God called this new family the church. Now, Jesus' plan for the church was that people would have equal purpose and equal dignity. And to prove it, Jesus made a point of hanging out with prostitutes, tax collectors, lepers, Packer fans, and other sinners. The religious leaders, when they looked at Jesus, said this about him: "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And they didn't mean it as a compliment. But on this Reformation weekend, what a gift of grace it has been. Because nobody is part of Jesus' community because they're smart, pretty, strong, or successful. You may live in a world where that's all real important, but not in Jesus' community. Not here. All we have in common is that we are sinners in need of God's mercy. So, God made us for relationships, but there's going to be some assembly required in these relationships. So how do we build one another up in relationships? I'm gonna have us use how we treated this guy as an example. All right. After the Green Bay and Chicago games this year, Viking quarterback Kirk Cousins endured some of the harshest criticism imaginable on Twitter and talk radio, and in the church narthex, the devil was receiving more positive comments. 4 weeks later, of course, he has the highest quarterback rating in the NFL, and everyone loves him. That's how it kind of works in sports. When the team is losing, the coach and players are miserable, and they get beat up mercilessly by others. But when they're winning and already feeling great, they are almost worshiped. So the church is kind of the opposite. When things are going well for us, we try to be humble. But when someone gets divorced, we don't beat them up, right? They don't feel bad enough already. They just need a place where they can be loved and accepted. And someone gets sick, we don't blame them for that. Our job is to care for them and encourage them. Or someone has a problem with alcohol or drugs. It's not a morality issue for us. It's just, how can we help? At a gathering some years ago, a woman, clearly distraught, approached the now deceased Archbishop Harry Flynn. Someone who witnessed the encounter said that the woman began to tell the Archbishop a story of an abortion that she had had many years prior. And Archbishop Flynn listened intently. When she finished, he extended his arms towards her. He opened up his hands and he said, "You've carried this burden long enough. Give it to me, and I'll carry it from now on." And she grabbed his hands, and she wept. You see, this is what Christian community does. When the suffering or burden is too much, the community absorbs it. When one loses hope or strength, the community provides it. Now technology can be a way for people to connect, and we do a lot of it here at Lord of Life. A sermon video is available online each week. We do podcasts, and there's Facebook Live. Technology is not a bad thing. But I have to say that I'm really glad you're all here today. Because sometimes we just need to be face to face. Earlier this year, I was doing a funeral here, and there were some church folks paying their respects, and I just asked them, "How did you know the deceased?" I thought they might be relatives or perhaps neighbors, but they answered, "Oh, we sit by him in church. We sit by him in church." See, relationships happen when we show up. And this past year, many of you have shown up for Kelly Rodenberg, who has just released a book titled "There's Something Going On Upstairs," and it is a book about the past year of her life, a life when, well, I'll let her tell the story.
So October 13th of last year, my husband and I received kind of a life-changing diagnosis that happened. I was diagnosed with a glioblastoma grade 4 brain tumor right above my right ear, which is why I don't have hair back there.
She really endured a lot over the course of the year, but she didn't have to do it alone. So a lot of people helped you get through these 30 radiation treatments, 7 cycles of chemo. How did you get through this year so well?
You know, when you're presented something that dark, you immediately have to go to the light, and you start leaning on people, and people step in, family, friends, church family, people that you maybe have lost contact with that come back into your life. I was very fortunate to have a number of people that, you know, I had a list of people that offered rides or offered to come and sit with me through treatments or things like that. And thankfully, my husband has a job that is 4 miles away, so we were from our home, so we were very fortunate with logistics of getting back and forth to treatments.
This is how important all of those relationships she had was.
Each and every one of you, you are amazing. You've been wonderful, and so much more than what Bob and I could ask for. And you've fed us well, both mentally, physically, spiritually, and it's just been a joy getting to know you better through a very, very hard time.
We are all in this life together. We can't do it by ourselves because God made us for relationship. Christians don't look down on anyone else. Our purpose as Christians is to reach out to those who are leading solitary lives, to build each other up, to absorb each other's pain, and to say, give me your burden, and I'll carry it for you. We will, in fact, be identified as Christians by our gentleness, our forgiveness, and our deep and delicate respect for one another. It will take some assembly, these relationships, but it's worth it because it's not good for anyone to be alone. Amen.